Hi, I'm Ian, and welcome to Ghosts and Bears, the podcast where we tell you the actual ghost story with the actual history in the actual place. On this episode, we're talking about the ghost of Agnes Bings. On September 29th, 1899, on a dark and stormy night, Agnes made a decision that she unfortunately would not live to regret. Coming up on Ghosts and Bears. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode 4. We are thrilled to have you here, and hopefully you will enjoy this episode as well. It's really an interesting one. We had a lot of fun doing this because it just really had so many different elements. Agnes was in a time and place where life was hard. The story takes place down on Store Street, or Wharf Street down here in Victoria, right downtown in the red light district. And it was not an easy go for her. She had a very sick husband. She had a child. He couldn't work. He was stuck at home. And so Agnes and her brother, Jordan, were basically the owner-operators of a bakery down there in the red light district. She did not get the high-end clientele. She got the roughest of the rough, but thankfully everyone likes bread and cake and cookies. So Agnes was able to kind of carve out a living with one of the few legitimate businesses in that part of town. But it was not an easy life. And there was a lot going on and a lot of, well, not great people at that time in Victoria. They were just coming off their gold rush high. There had been massive expansion. Vancouver was a couple of muddy, creek-dwelling people over there, a couple of shacks by a muddy river, and that was about it. And Victoria was the place to be. It's where the money was. It's where all the ships came and went, and it was the important place. But along with that and that massive explosion of population, the infrastructure just had not caught up. And unfortunately for Agnes, that infrastructure included the local law enforcement. So it was not a good time to be a woman alone wandering the streets in 1899. When Agnes was murdered, this was not new for Victoria. There was a lot of murder going on. Pretty murdery place, to be honest with you. So what made her crime so different was the manner in which she was killed, the way her body was left. It had people pretty scared. There'd been someone killing in the same sort of fashion 11 years earlier, and there were lots of rumors about that killer. So you can see how that would sort of tie in with what was going on here. This is a lot because we have the story. We have our friend Dawn, who is a psychic medium. She's a rescue medium. She actually helps energy that gets left behind. And then we also have Jason reading us the sort of true crime version from that time with a great article from a website here in town called the Capital Daily. So lots of elements to this one, makes it a long episode. So I'm going to stop babbling on and we are just going to jump into it. You're going to hear me. I'm down at the opposite of the in the Inner Harbor, but opposite of where we normally would tell stories, over by the Delta Ocean Point, because that's where Agnes was found and that's where Agnes is still seen. So it seemed important to be there. Fill you in on a few little details on that one. Got in a big fight with some birds. Literally beside me at one point, there is a crow and a seagull fighting each other. And it is so loud. But you know what? I left it in because, hey, that's what we all come here for, right? And the other thing is, there's some points where I have the microphone in front of Dawn and I don't have it in front of me. And this is the last time we will do that, because when I listened back to the audio, I was like, ugh, really? And if there's one thing that drives me crazy in a podcast, it's when the voice levels are so off. So Jason and I went out and bought some mini mics that we can now clip onto people and plug into our little recorder unit. And that way, from now on, I promise, the voices will at least be clear and you'll be able to hear them. So with those two caveats out of the way, screaming birds and not very loud voices at some point, I present to you the one, the only story of Agnes Bing's ghost. I'm standing here in the inner harbor of Victoria, and I'm I'm standing on Palatzis Rock. And Palatzis is a place that is pretty important to the Lekwungen people, the indigenous people who are here. They believed it to be a place of great power, and they would often bring their kids, their babies, to lie out on the rock because they believed they would absorb more power from it. We're also very close to the Delta Ocean Point Hotel, and that's kind of what poor Agnes' story revolves around, is that location. Agnes Bing was a woman who, in September of 1899, September 29th, 1899, made a decision that unfortunately she would not live to regret. Agnes owned a bakery in the red light district of town, just on Worth Street. And she would often go home quite late, depending on what was going on with the bakery. And if she got off work or finished her work at an okay time, she was able to take the streetcar home. It would go up Worth Street, go across the Ellis Point Bridge, and take her into Victoria West, where she lived. But if she was delayed, then she would have to walk that route. And that would take about 40 minutes versus the streetcar, which took about 10 minutes. The night she left, the streetcar had stopped running, and to make matters worse, it was literally a dark and stormy night. So she decided to go a different way, and it was what was known around here and to the locals as the shortcut. Not generally because it saved you much time, but because it would mostly end with the end of your life being cut short. It was the railroad bridge across the inner harbor. And back in those days, it was literally just a track. There was no handrails, there was nothing. It was just simply a track across trestles that went across the water. Now we have a big modern bridge, and of course cars, bikes, people, everything. It's all good to go. It goes up and down, very fancy. But in those days, it was just a trestle that brought the train from the main part of the island onto the small space that is Victoria City. A lot of times there would be sailors who would get drunk and party in the red light district, and then they would think they could save some time and cut across the shortcut. And it was pretty standard that at least a few times a month the police would have to get long poles with hooks on the end and pull their bodies out of the water, where they had, of course, stumbled off, tripped, fallen in, and drowned. When Agnes did not return home, she had a young daughter and a husband who was quite ill. She had her family quite worried. And so her husband sent for the police to come. He was concerned about his wife. It was now sort of 4 a.m. She had not come home. He told them where she was, told them who she was. And because she was a reputable business owner, they immediately started to get to work. They went to the red light district and began asking around, and even sex workers need cookies, so they all knew who she was. And they had independently had said they'd seen her heading out quite late in the dark and stormy night across the shortcut. Thought the police. Well, we know what happened to her then. They got their lanterns, they got their long, dead sailor grabbing poles. I'm sure it had a technical name. And they headed out across the bridge slowly, carefully, looking for anything in the water that they could spot Agnes, swirling skirts, flowing hair, something that they could find her body with. But they were in for a bigger surprise, because they got all the way across the bridge and they found nothing. There's just nothing there. Once they had made it over to the other side, but at this point dawn was starting to break, and in the far corner of the railroad yards there was a tree, and that tree was covered in crows that were swooping down and swooping up again. And no one really knew what was going on. But in the police business, they call this a clue, and so they headed over to check it out. What they found was a lot more gruesome than they'd bargained for. They found Agnes. She had been strangled, and then, unfortunately for her, she'd been sliced from her sternum to her pubic bone, wrenched open, and her organs had been displayed quite artfully around her body. Now, of course, only 11 years earlier, there'd been a murderer who had been practicing this very exact type of butchery, and it was, of course, Jack the Ripper. This was an interesting theory because no one had ever, of course, caught Jack. Serial killers don't generally wake up one morning and say, I think I'm done with this killing thing. I think I'm going to raise orchids. No, that's not what happens. They either get caught or they die. And no one had ever caught Jack, and there was no reason to believe he had just died. And so as a result, they began their investigation. Now, the media, of course, jumped on this Jack the Ripper angle, and surprise. And, of course, headlines were published quite quickly with "The Ripper Walks Among Us" and "Jack in the New World." People were terrified. This was one of the working theories the London police had, was that Jack the Ripper had made his way to the New World, where he could kill a lot more freely in communities that weren't connected by strong communication ties and never get caught. For about 6 weeks, the city was plunged into absolute terror. There was a curfew, people weren't going out on their own, and of course the media helped it all along very calmly by continuing to publish some rather inflammatory headlines. The police, in the meantime, 6 weeks later, still did not have any idea who had done this. Victoria was a rough place to be. This was not the genteel tourist town we are now. This was a really rough town, and the police just weren't getting anywhere with it. They even brought in the Pinkerton guards from the States. They imported inspectors, detectives. They just weren't getting anywhere. In the end, they even turned to a psychic who, as it turned out, was absolutely no help. But she certainly fueled more headlines when she pronounced, "He's killed before and he'll kill again." Eventually, the case just kind of lost steam. No one was murdered in the same fashion in Victoria, and thankfully it was the only murder of that nature we had here. But it was still never something that was solved. I should mention where I am now in the Inner Harbor. We have a very busy aircraft flight airport, waterplane airport. So you're going to be hearing some noise in the background like that. So I apologize for that. Now, though, everything was sort of done and dusted. The only thing that would happen was people would see sometimes on the unused land across the harbor, the old rail yards, they would see a gray figure wandering around, often here where I'm standing on Palatzis Rock. And everyone who knew their history knew exactly who it was, that it was Agnes, and that she was, of course, not resting peacefully. But it wasn't really a big deal until they built the Delta Ocean Hotel. Oh, good. Now the seagulls and the crows are fighting right beside me. Oh my gosh. Shut up! Anyway, the hotel was being built, and there was this sort of 6 foot by 4 foot area that anyone who passed through, construction workers, people building, would feel panicked. In fact, there was more than one time they called an ambulance to the site because they believed these poor gentlemen were having heart attacks. They were having shortness of breath, feeling like they couldn't swallow, like they were choking. Their hearts would race. They would feel absolute terror. But what was more interesting was when they stepped through that space that was going to be in the future lobby, they were fine. There was no more panic. There was no more fear, and all their physical signs went back to normal. It was really when people began looking at the old history that they realized that was the exact spot where Agnes had been found. It's not a surprise that she was desperately trying to convey to somebody, anybody, what her last moments were like and what she went through in her final moments. Now she's seen here on Palazzas Rock, usually at night, kind of a faint glowing gray figure. She's also seen walking along the edge of the land where she was found, around the edge of the hotel. People will see her through the windows of the salon. Some guests might catch a glimpse of her late at night through the windows of the hotel. Agnes still walks. Agnes never got the peace that she needed, and no one was ever found for her crime. Now, so many years later, there's just no chance of that happening. No one's ever going to be, of course, caught or convicted. They may one day solve the mystery, but no one's going to pay for what they did to Agnes, cutting her life short, depriving of her daughter, of her life, her business, everything. So this remains one of Victoria's more interesting haunted spots, because she's still wandering around. She's still visible here on Palazzas Rock. Is it the power from the rock that keeps that energy going, keeps her energy going? Or is it just her desperate attempt to find some justice? We're not sure. We are going to be talking to Dawn Kirkham today. Dawn has had her own experiences here. Dawn is a psychic medium. She has a group called Beyond Belief Paranormal, and she is pretty insightful when it comes to these kinds of things. Dawn helped me out quite a bit with the book, Victoria's Most Haunted, and I'm sure she'll have some pretty interesting things to say. All right, so Dawn is here with me now, Dawn Kirkham, who we spoke of earlier. And Dawn, you had your own kind of experience with this story that is not your typical experience where, oh, I saw this thing. No, there's more to it. Please, and tell us how you end up experiencing these sorts of things.
Well, thank you, Ian. And it's definitely a story that captured my imagination and my heart, but it captured it from not the story side of it first. So, I don't know whether you can tell from my accent, but I'm not from around here. So I come from Liverpool in the UK, and maybe I'd been here a year or two, no more than that. Yeah. I am a clairvoyant medium, so I see spirit and I also feel spirit. And just as part of my normal meditation practice, I was just doing my thing, meditating, and suddenly this very dark energy appeared in my meditation. So I saw him in my mind's eye. He was dressed in black. He looked a little bit like, I don't know if you ever remember the TV show Penelope Pitstop, like the hooded claw type of thing. Yeah. But that was probably my interpretation of him, or maybe how he liked to see himself. Right. I don't know. Right. But he was, very sinister, very, very ominous. I felt, kind of scared. There was fear in the energy that I was experiencing.
Which I'm sure he was happy to
Absolutely. And it was shocking because it just was not what I was expecting to be doing in my meditation. And then he showed me, and there was a woman, and she was in Victorian type dress, and she was lying on the floor. And I won't go into the gory details, but the first thing that came to mind was, oh, this looks like Jack the Ripper. Right. I had no thought about it being kind of Canadian. Right. I'm from the UK, so Jack the Ripper. Yeah. I would think of the the London version, but it was a very gory scene, and again that was quite shocking. Yeah. And he was reveling in his handiwork, right. If I'm going to say that. Yeah. And I didn't really have much communication with him. He was just, his whole reason was trying to make me frightened and intimidating. I mean, he was really quite close to my face, and a long time ago when I was learning the ropes of being a clairvoyant medium and a paranormal investigator, I was trained not to be fearful in these situations, because it really isn't your friend at all. No. It just closes you down. It closes you down, and actually it makes you do things that your rational self wouldn't do. So I always go to that place of love, so kind of back into that heart space, and just kind of beamed the energy out from there, and he disappeared.
It was kind of the opposite of what
exactly. He couldn't sit in that energy, but he was a constant in my meditations. Really?
He kept coming back.
He did, yes. So every time I went to meditate, he was there. I did get glimpses of his story. So that was not his first kill.
Right.
There were many women. And I also saw him boarding a ship, and I think he went to New Zealand.
Oh, wow.
So kind of pushing all of these pieces together, it kind of came clear that it was not Jack the Ripper as I would know him.
Right.
And so I reached out to John and asked him if there was kind of a Jack the Ripper story here, and he shared the story of Agnes Baines.
Yeah.
I got the chills all through my body, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that is exactly who I experienced. Now, I'm sure he didn't walk around in a black cape, with a a mask on, but that's how it was, that sinister side to it. And so, poor Agnes definitely was not his first victim. There were other victims, and how I saw it, along the coast of Seattle, Portland, that kind of west coast. He was active there as well. So, so I called him JR from
right.
there.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And it was funny because he really got into the investigation. So I was doing public investigations at the Maritime Museum at that point, and he would come and interact with people in that, and really, kind of be in their faces too. So I'm like, I'm going to have to try and deal with him. I mean, I tried, because I am a trained rescue medium, so I tried to do the whole rescue type things, and
was there light for him?
No. I like to think that there's always going to be light, no matter what we do in our human form. But he had no interest in making that transition. He was having a blast in the physical world, up to mischief.
Wow.
So my only defense was, every time he appeared, I sat in that heart space. And he couldn't stand being in that high vibration, and so I always laugh. I say I loved him out of my life, and he disappeared, and he has never come back.
Would you say, that love energy is the antithesis of who he was, his energy? It was the absolute opposite.
Well, it's a very interesting, deep, and philosophical question, but I have to believe that at our core, who we are at our non-physical level is pure positive love. And for some, they stray so far away from that, they lose that kind of connection and remembering. But at some point, that reabsorption into that collective love consciousness, I'm hopeful happens to everybody,
I like that. I've always said to people, the energy that's left behind, the ghosts, the spirits, whatever you want to call them, 99% of the time is not something to be feared. It's just people who are a lot of times haven't figured out they're dead, haven't figured out how to be in this new realm they find themselves in. But I always, kind of jokingly, but truthfully say, if you're a good person in life, you're going to be a good person in death. If you're a not nice person in life, well, death seldom improves you. You may have lessons to learn, but you could still be more about wanting to scare people or frighten people or alarm people.
Certainly, if at the moment of transition, the energy remains more physically focused, because for me, the death experience is about going back to non-physical energy, going back to that collective, however you want to call that. But for some, for a whole variety of reasons, which is probably another podcast, that doesn't happen, and so they remain looking to the physical, so their energy is more physical. And at that point, angels and guides, they can't do anything about that, because they're just not on a vibrational match, which is where rescue mediums come in, because we're physically focused, but we can raise our vibration and help make that transition. So I would like to think that everybody gets that opportunity to go back to pure positive love, but at the end of the day, it's their choice.
It's going to be up to them. Yeah.
And he was not interested at all.
He's enjoying torturing the living.
He is enjoying. It's a new lease of life for him.
Wow.
So so I've always remained So I feel connected to the Agnes Baines case. So one of the things that we've been doing is kind of a Victoria Haunt series, where we've been going outside because of course we're still in indoor lockdown, and kind of filming some communication attempts at some of the kind of known locations. And so this week a small number of us are going to walk as much as we can walk the steps of Agnes Baines with the ghost box to see if we can communicate. I'm hoping we get to communicate with him, but maybe Agnes will come through. Now I don't believe that Agnes is stuck here in some way, and if people are seeing Agnes's spirit.
Yeah, and that's been reported.
Exactly. I don't think her consciousness is attached to that.
Because that's a really good thing about a good theory about energy and ghosts too, is that there's a few different kinds, right? Some are aware, conscious, they are the residual energy, but others are more like loop. Like a recording, of a traumatic event that left a mark on that spiritual atmosphere.
And in fact, one aspect of that is, fractured soul. So at that moment of death, in that fear state, did a piece of Agnes get left? And so, we want to walk retrace the steps, see if we can have that communication, see if we can reintegrate any piece of Agnes that might be left. I don't think her full consciousness is here at all. I mean, I've tapped into that, many times, and I just don't get that sense that she's wandering.
Where can people find that? Watch that, because this is going to come out sometime in June, so your video will be up. Where can they find that?
So I have two channels. So we have the Beyond Belief Paranormal Events channel, so it'll be on there. But I also have my own Dawn Kirkham channel, which is a kind of a bit more of a mishmash. So some paranormal stuff, some spiritual stuff, but an awful lot of stuff around self-development and how you can develop your intuition. I'm big into crystals, so a lot of stuff about crystals. I'm an earth-based practitioner, so some earth-based practice. So it's just whatever inspires me to do a video, and I do it.
That's amazing. So thank you for that, and thank you for that totally different perspective, because that's not a perspective we usually consider, is that the perpetrator of the crime is in spirit and still wandering around. So that's pretty cool. And thank you for coming down here in the cold and risk being attacked by geese. And there are a lot of geese with babies, and they are certainly interested in us. Dawn also co-owns a shop. It's Cohen, right?
Yes.
Called The Hidden Gem. It's very cool. So when you come to Victoria, as I know this podcast will convince you to do, definitely check out Dawn's shop in the West Shore, Hidden Gem. Thank you for being here with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for spending time with me, listening to my babblings and my theories on life, and giving me a platform to share them. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Take care, and we'll head back for the rest of the podcast now. It was great to be able to hear the story side of things. It was great to hear Dawn's take on it with that insight into the gentleman who may still be around. And we're going to do something a little different for us, and this probably won't be a common thing, but we're going to add the true crime element to it. I stumbled across this great piece on a website called the Capital Daily here in Victoria, and we're going to share the piece because it is a great historical look at the crime and sort of what was going on in terms of Victoria and crime solving and all the rest of it. So Jason is going to share that with us right now.
This article is by Tristan Hopper from the news site The Capital Daily. It provides us with yet another narrative on what happened to and who is responsible for the unsolved and grisly murder of Agnes Baines. Ian told the ghost story, Dawn told the Post story, and this is the true crime take on the whole thing. The last anyone had seen 44-year-old baker Agnes Baines, she had been bracing herself against the wind and rain as she walked home on an unusually dark autumn night. There were safer, more well-lit ways to get home, but Baines chose the fastest, across the E&N Railway Bridge, located roughly where the Johnson Street Bridge is now. Laden down with packages, she had asked her brother Jordan to accompany her home, but he had refused, ostensibly because he was buried in a book. The next day, Bing's mangled body was found in Vic West, crumpled against a telegraph pole. The woman had been throttled to death, stripped of her clothing, and disemboweled in the horrible manner of Jack the Ripper, read a BC newspaper account from the time. Another account called the details too revolting for publication. As soon as the crime came across the desk of the province's Deputy Attorney General H.A. McLean, he immediately called in outside help. And thus, on October 11, 1899, a Pinkerton agency detective known to history only as Agent No. 5 stepped off a steamship from Portland on a mission to find Canada's Jack the Ripper. Agent No. 5 was entering a very different Victoria than the wealthy retiree haven it is now. It was a city of whaling ships, heavy industry, and a place where the local Songhees and Esquimalt continued to travel primarily by cedar canoe and lived among elders who could still remember the days before the arrival of Europeans. Victoria still dwarfed Vancouver in both size and economic power. While it was already a city of high-end tea rooms and hilltop mansions, it also retained the gritty character of a dirt-roaded port city. Bing's Store Street Bakery was only a few blocks away from a vibrant red light district quietly tolerated by local authorities. Chinatown, far from being the tourist-friendly drag that it is now, was an archaic assemblage of shops, gambling dens, opium factories, and densely packed wooden shacks. The BC capital was no stranger to murder and death. It was only 10 years removed from holding public hangings. The year before the Bings murder, a prostitute named Belle Adams had severed the head of her lover after he had threatened to leave her for another woman. Only 2 days after Bing's death, the owner of the Garrick's Head pub, Michael Powers, would be fatally bludgeoned in an act of suspected romantic retribution. Agent No. 5 would be probing both killings while in Victoria. But Bing's death had been different from all of Victoria's other mayhem. Press accounts recalled Bing's murder a crime of such fiendishness and mysteriousness that has seldom been equaled in this part of the world. This wasn't a botched robbery or even a domestic murder. It was an act of incomprehensible depravity. The very concept of serial killing was still a foreign idea. It had only been 2 years before that U.S. authorities had executed H.H. Holmes, the Chicago mass murderer often cited as America's first serial killer. A graphic Daily Colonist account of Bing's murder didn't even consider the possibility that Bing's might have been a random victim murdered by a stranger for fun or sexual gratification. Their theory was that the murderer had attempted to rob Bing's and, meeting with a stout resistance, became maddened and murdered and mutilated her. The only description of the murder was an overcoated figure, quick in his movements, who seemed to be taking pains to hide his appearance. A scarf concealed his face, and he even wore rubber boots that hid the sound of his footsteps on the wooden surface of the rail bridge. The chilling portrait came from a woman who may have narrowly escaped becoming the figure's victim that night. A Mrs. Bales had also been heading towards the railway bridge that night when she had glimpsed the cloaked figure lurking in a stand of railway buildings. After noticing that the figure was following her, a panicked Bales ducked into a group of men going the other direction and doubled back towards downtown. After waiting until the figure had seemingly moved on, Bales once again made for the bridge just as Bings was doing the same. As the two women wordlessly reached the west shore and went their separate ways, Bales suddenly saw the overcoated figure step off the bridge and set off in Bing's direction through the gale-force winds. In about 4 or 5 minutes, Bales heard 2 screams, read a police report. The cause of Bing's death is believed to have been strangulation, and her body shows signs that she had fought hard against her attacker in her final movements. She was found completely naked, her clothes having been carried a short distance away from the scene of the murder and thrown in a bush. Curiously, given the violence of the killing, the clothes didn't have a trace of blood on them. Bing's lower body had been viciously slashed by a blunt object, with gouges particularly notable around her genitals and perineum. Her womb ovaries were still attached, but lay outside of her body, and 12 feet of her intestines were missing. Like the 1888 victims of Jack the Ripper, Bing's gruesome death came at the end of a life that had already been filled with hardship. Jack had exclusively targeted London prostitutes in their late 30s and early 40s, but Victoria's murderer had taken the life of a German immigrant forced to work long hours in order to care for an invalid husband and an 8-year-old son. She often returned home after dark, and neighbors reported she had little time for friends. Agent number 5 quickly discovered that the 1890s Victoria police were laughably incompetent at solving murderers. At the time he took up the investigation, the most promising leads pursued by local law enforcement were the word of a psychic. The psychic had apparently used her second sight to pin the crime of an Indian some 30 miles up the coast, and the police quickly dispatched an officer to check it out. I was somewhat at a loss to know what to say to the investigating officers, as they evidently put some faith in this supernatural revelation, wrote the agent. It wasn't the last time that one of Victoria's hapless police would drop everything to chase down a tip on the Bing's murder sent in by the city's ample supply of spiritualists and self-proclaimed clairvoyants. It would appear that there are a lot of cranks here, concluded agent number 5. Suspects began to emerge. There was a man named Coates who had once made improper proposals to Bing's in her bakery. There was a Bill Hellborn who, on the night of the murder, had walked into the city's Tivoli Theatre and began aggressively telling the manager about the idea for a play about a woman who was killed and cut to pieces. There was Bob, a native man who had reportedly threatened a woman on the Songhees Reserve that he would cut her up like what he did to a white woman. But agent number 5 seemed to reserve special scrutiny for Bing's brother, Jordan. He was a heavy drinker, known for his violent temper. Most suspicious of all, even before Bing's body had been found, several witnesses reported that Jordan was already declaring that his sister had been murdered. Ever since the killing, Jordan had been loudly proclaiming to anyone who listened that the murder was committed by Indians. Since the murder, Jordan said that he was sure Indians had committed the deed, as he knew the Indians in Arizona disemboweled their victims, wrote agent number 5. This was squarely within an era in Canadian history in which non-whites could easily come under criminal suspicion under the flimsiest of evidence. Nevertheless, Victoria's Indigenous largely escaped official blame in the Bing's murder, although it wasn't for any lack of stereotyping. Indians seldom or never commit murder without provocation, proclaimed the Daily Colonist, and when they do not mutilate the bodies in the ways that Mrs. Bing's was. Just like the original Jack the Ripper, the killer of Agnes Bing's would never face justice. To this day, the crime is deemed unsolved, but there is an epilogue to this story that did not exist in the case of Jack's Whitechapel murders. Investigators on the Bing's murder ultimately began to suspect that the true killer had been among them the whole time. David MacDonald Gordon, a 73-year-old drifter with deep connections to the city's underworld, had briefly been recruited as an auxiliary constable to help probe the killing. Not only did Gordon turn out to have a suspiciously intimate knowledge of the case, but he would become curiously adamant without any evidence that the killer was a man named Jack McCluskey who had since left town and couldn't be found. In December, after Gordon found himself back in jail for a petty theft, Pinkerton dispatched a new detective, agent number 3, to go undercover as a prisoner and befriend the suspected killer. For days on end, agent number 3 endured Gordon's extremely vulgar stories of the past, his stints as a back alley doctor for sex diseases, the endless young girls he boasted of ruining, his lewd stories of Victoria women receiving crude vasectomies, which he referred to as being disemboweled. With agent number 3 made up a story of raping a 15-year-old girl, Gordon hung on his every word. The more I talk with Gordon convinces me that he either committed the Bing's murder or has in some way been connected in some serious trouble before, wrote agent number 3. I expect to hear of more than one case. In fact, I believe him to be a man of demoralized brain. Ultimately, the Bing's murder would only come up once. By sheer coincidence, another prisoner would bring up the killing along with his own theory that the culprit had likely bribed the police off his trail. All of a sudden, the normal loudmouth Gordon clammed up. other than to repeat his confidence that a Jack McCluskey had done the deed. Well, I know it. Some men have a mania that way and cannot help themselves, Gordon explained. Then, Gordon directly addressed Agent Number 3 with haunting sincerity. If you ever kill a man, never let the blood of the man's head get on your clothes or even your hands, for it will never come off, he said as he examined his own palms. Only 3 days later, Gordon was returning from the prison laundry when he began to vomit up blood from a pulmonary hemorrhage. Agent Number 3 was able to rush to his side, and as Gordon violently choked up clots of blood, the detective heard him say, "I want to tell you something." Gasping and clutching at the air with his hand, Gordon said, "I am gone," before screaming his last words, "Oh my God! My mother! Oh my God!" Wrote the detective, "He died still holding my hand."
I want to thank Jason for making his way through that. It was a bit of a tough read. It was definitely written as an article, not a story, and I thought he did really well with that. And, you know, it reminds me, I've had a couple comments about, oh, it's too bad Jason isn't on more. I need to tell you why. Jason, like me, has a full-time job. Great. Jason then also has a second full-time job that he goes out and he delivers prescriptions to seniors. And part of it is he just likes to get out of the house and he thinks it's a good thing to do. So that's his other full-time job that he does 5 days a week. He's also in the military reserves where he plays in the band. He plays trumpet at a near professional level. And he also has a car brokerage, which means you can hire him to help you find a car. He'll do the research. He'll go with you to negotiate the deal and all those good things. So he's busy. Like when I said that at the beginning, Jason's really busy, I wasn't kidding. He's super busy. So while I've got my full-time job and I do ghost walks and the podcast and, you know, write the occasional book, he makes me look like a slacker. So that is why I am so grateful when Jason can go with us to record stories, because we're usually able to do that on the weekend. And that's kind of our time when we have some time together and we can go out and do those things. So just in case you're wondering why he's not sitting here right now, currently he's out delivering prescriptions to lovely seniors who love him and give him $2 tips every once in a while. It's very sweet. So that's what's going on there. It was a great story. It was such a neat mixture of the true crime and the psychic and the ghost story that we tell. And I really enjoyed doing this episode and putting it together. Again, Victoria, crazy history. I want to thank all of our lovely coffee buyers. Couldn't do it without you. Really grateful for that. And you are the reason we were able to go out and buy those mics. So thank you already for helping. The border, I hear, may be opening up soon. We would love to get back out there and do some traveling, but we're going to need some cash. So if you're willing and able, please become a Buy Me a Coffee member. You can do that at buymeacoffee.com/ghosts and bears. There's also a link on our website. But in the meantime, thank you to the coffee buyers: Arwen, Tammy, Ginger, Danny, Sarah, Tori, Christy, Steve, Mari, Brianna, Melinda, Aaron, Evan, Dick Sloga, Jen, Leslie, Kathleen, Pavakopu, Rebecca, Kyle, Sandy, Jordan, Michelle, Sasquatch, Charlie, Jules, Penn, Claire, Lauren, Catherine, Michelle, Spandex Sky, Haunted History, Betsy, Samuel, and Greg. Please know how appreciated you are and how grateful we are for your help. We really do rely on it. So thank you for the support you've already given us. And hopefully we will be able to get some support as well. We also have a new thing, which I'm super excited about. If you saw the Port Alice video, you know I am no videographer. And this episode has been supported by a fellow named Alex, who is a videographer and who kindly offered to do the video for this episode. So if you go to our YouTube channel you're going to see, and that's all free, just sort of to help you figure out where we are and what we're doing. Go to the YouTube channel, check out the video Alex has made. If you like it, let us know. Should he do more, or would you rather have me do it on my phone? I think that answer is going to be pretty clear. But hey, let's make it a thing. You let me know. Do you like it? Do we want to invite Alex back and keep doing it? I am really grateful to him, and he was excited to do it. He knew the book. He's been on a ghost walk, so he kind of got the vibe, and I'm just thrilled that he was willing to do it. So please check it out and let us know. That'd be really great. Don't forget, pictures are available for our Buy Me a Coffee people, $5 and up. You get those in-depth pictures of where we were and what we were doing. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for that. We have been really, really blessed to be able to do this. I am so happy that I've been able to balance everything else out and still find time to do this and still enjoy doing this. We have in the can already 4 more episodes ready to go. At least the story time stuff is. I have to do this every time, but I look forward to that as well, and putting those together. I did the final edits, editorial edits for Vancouver's Most Haunted, which should be launched in October. So that's exciting. I'm sure, blathering on about that when that happens. And I hope you will look for that book when it comes out, probably to a website near you, to be honest. I know it's in all the local bookstores and it's throughout Western Canada, but I don't know so much about anywhere else. So you may have to pick that up on the magical interwebs. And I'm doing the ghost walks again. For me, I'm on Thursday nights. If you want to go on a ghost walk, we'd sure welcome you to come. You do need to buy your tickets in advance, ghostrywalks.com, and you can purchase your tickets. And the walks are an hour long, 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. I believe they have 2 on the weekends. I only know about me. So I'm only doing that on Thursday. And I would love to have you join us. So look into that if you happen to be in Victoria. Or if, from what I hear, pretty soon we're going to be able to cross the border. So Red Lobster may be in my future. Anybody who doesn't know, I am obsessed with Red Lobster. I don't know why. It's just a thing. And again, thank you for all of your support and for listening and for telling other people and rating and reviewing the podcast. Please keep doing that. That's a huge help. And the more you do it, the more people hear about it. So if you have a way of sharing the podcast, please do it. Don't be shy. I won't be upset. I think that would be amazing because there's nothing better than a recommendation from a friend. Our episode for next time takes us to the far north. We're going to be heading up towards Terrace, BC, and interviewing some paranormal investigators up there. And I'm excited to have their stuff on. They then took us around to all the different places that we talked about, and we took some pictures as well from that. So pretty cool stories. These guys are really about the evidence and what happens, and they've got some pretty hair-raising stories. So it was great to talk to them, and that's going to be episode 5. So keep your ears open for that. Set your subscribe buttons to go so that when the episode drops, you'll know right away. We've now come to the end of another episode. Again, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting us. We are really grateful. Jason and I are having a blast doing this. And please remember that we want to hear your stuff too. Please send us an email at gmail at ghostsandbears@gmail.com. Reach out to us. Tell us your story. Tell us the history. And maybe we'll be coming to see you. That would be pretty cool. So thanks again for joining us. Have a fantastic week, day, or whatever it is you're doing right now. And next time you're wandering around, remember, we've got the actual ghost stories with the actual history in the actual place. And hopefully, one day, that place will be with you. Take care. Bye.